Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to shoot a review of this saber, which is the Revan Saber from TXQ Sabers. Now this is one of two different Revan models. This is the pointy purple version as opposed to the more rounded red version. So if you've been watching my channel, I have done reviews of several different versions of this saber from different saber smiths. So I wanted to use this review for two purposes. One, to give you guys a look at TXQ's electronics and talk a little bit about how they stack up to other people's, and also to look at this model in specific and how it compares to a lot of others. So let's go ahead and get going on that. First off, I wanted to talk about the construction of the saber itself. All right, so let's get to construction. First off, let me talk about the buttons. This is one of the character sabers from TXQ, so it doesn't have the standard illuminated button option. It has buttons that are actually consistent with this model, which I kind of like. The fact that a lot of the times, like with the LGT Revan Saber, they've got their typical core that slides in and slides out, and you're set with that button and recharge port. This one, you're not forced with the button and the recharge port like every other saber model. The buttons can be specific to the hilt design itself, which actually gives the Revan the ability to have these buttons where they're supposed to be look like they're supposed to be. This is a bit of a pain in the butt in terms of navigating the board features, but I'll talk about that later. So actual buttons, in terms of the design itself, it's pretty consistent with a Revan design with a couple of exceptions. Okay, this one and the Korbanth, I've noticed, have this design up front that repeats itself on the other panels. Okay, strictly speaking, the Canon Revan design has this, and the design continues onto the other sides as a flat design, but without having this sort of T-form right here. So that's not strictly speaking correct, but it's better than just leaving the other ones blank, which is what a Saberforge does. So it's got something that makes it look like a Revan saber, though it's not exactly quite accurate in terms of that. Also, this black bit right here. Most of the versions of it just have this black bit sort of beveled out. The Vaders Vault and the Black Series HASBRO one have some little details in here that kind of make it look like you're seeing the insides of a saber through this black slit or some other layer underneath. That's a faux layer, but this one does not have that. Other than that, it's pretty consistent with other Revan designs. It's pretty canonically accurate. One thing that this has that I've not seen before is these sort of swirly embellishments right here on the claws. Now, that's kind of cool. I'm not real certain where they got that idea from because I haven't seen it on any of the others. You can also see that the claws are beveled towards the end, which is something that in the HASBRO version, these articulate out. But all other versions that I've seen just sort of continue them off into points that are flush. So having that sort of beveled, almost knife blade look right there is distinct, I think, to this model and these weird little swirlies. All right, so not a bad model. Comes with a cover tech clip. Better, more accurate than the Ultrasabers model. More usable than the HASBRO model. Not as accurate as the Vaders Vault model, but again, apples and oranges. You're looking at something that's a fraction of the cost. Pretty similar in a lot of ways to the Korbanth model, except with a couple of embellishments that I don't know where they got that idea from. All right, so now in terms of construction, let's take a look at it. The pommel is, of course, removable. Okay, there's the pommel piece, vented. In these TXQ sabers, they have a pull tab right here that pulls out the saber core. Now, this doesn't have the buttons on it. This actually has some connectors right here that connect to the area that the buttons are in. So unlike an LGT where everything comes out together, this is actually a two-part installation. I'll get to the second part a little bit later down the road. It's not a bad design, except for the fact that this pull tab right here is only connected on a piece of plastic over the speaker, which does mean that this piece of plastic can crack, and then it gets difficult to get the thing in and out without damaging it further. The nice thing about this is you can get these things separate, so if you've got a baselit one, you can pick up the Profi version of the same thing, and you can install it into this saber fairly easily. So it has that, a little bit of the LGT feature of plug and play the board that you want into the saber. You are locked into TXQ's board specifically, but it also has sort of a little bit of the actual installed saber insofar as we can get things that work with the specific buttons that work with this hilt. All right, so there's the saber core. More on that and its functions in just a little bit. All right, hollow inside. Okay, we've got a CoverTech clip. The CoverTech clip is plastic, not metal, so it's, at least I think that's plastic and not metal. Maybe that's metal. Let me tap it with something. Yeah, that's metal. Okay, my mistake. So CoverTech clip is metal. The claws are held on by a Phillips head screw, a tiny one right here, only at the bottom. So in order to get these guys off, I've got to unscrew the Phillips head. Now again, this is, I think, a pretty good design in terms of aesthetics. The Korbanth ones were glued on. The Saberforge ones have big, obvious screw holes. I'm not real sure how the claws are attached on a Vaders Vault. I haven't gotten a chance to look at that, but not a bad design. I mean, it's hard to see those screws unless you're looking for them. But if I unscrew all three of these screws, and I got to be careful not to lose them. All right, once those are out, the claws don't fully detach. They're loose, but they don't detach because they're actually held in by a ring up top. This is very similar to the ring design on the HASBRO one, but you can see the claws do kind of rotate around this ring. So if I need to get a better grip on that, I can just throw the claws all together, unscrew this little retention ring right here, and then the claws come right off. So the claws are held in with that hook up at the top, beveled right here to fit the saber, screw hole at the bottom. The thing about that is that it does mean that because of this bevel right here that goes around this thing, you can't detach the saber in the middle without removing the claws first. Right? If your saber gets loose while you're using it, if this joint right here gets loose, then the alignment of these buttons between two claws starts to get a little bit wonky. When I got this thing in the mail, the buttons were right up against one of the claws, and it all kind of rattled until I took it apart and cinched it all down and put it together tightly. But this part unscrews. There we go, basically a solid tube. Get a better look at those connectors right there that line up with the connectors on the board. Okay, the tricky part about this is getting this in the right direction. Battery is actually down away from the buttons in order to get it to connect, so it takes a couple tries sometimes to get that thing to line up so that it pops together correctly. All right, this is a baselit model again, so there's an LED right there. Right, the LED, or the blade is held in by 3 retention screws around this line right here. Okay, the bite on that is pretty shallow, so you can see the blade plug, or the blade socket only goes down to here, so the blade only goes down to about here, so you're grabbing towards the bottom of the blade. So you got 3 screws, which is nice and sturdy, but you got a shallow bite on the blade, which is not quite as sturdy. Okay, the screw that holds the other part of the installation in is right there. When this is all assembled, that is behind a claw, and you don't see it. So when you have it disassembled, I can unscrew this tension screw right here. This is actually a big screw, so it takes a bit. All right, so pretty long screw right there. But with that out, I can push the rest of the installation out, and here's the other half of the install. So you see it's got these the buttons right here that line up with the buttons right here. Once again, as I'll show you in the next part here, the second button doesn't do anything on the baselit installation. But in theory, if I wanted to have a Profi board, I would just buy these 2 parts, which are sold separately. I could get a NeoPixel set up here. I could get a Profi board set up down here. Theoretically, I could run a Profi board to a baselit LED if I wanted to. So I could plug and play and swap around a little bit because Profi is pretty acceptable. I don't know if this thing will run a NeoPixel. I kind of doubt that it would, but I'm pretty sure that a Profi could run a baselit if you wanted it to because it's open source and you can tinker with it. So there's the 2 parts of that. And here is the rest of the saber with the buttons. So once again, we've got several parts in this design. We've got the switch activation section. We've got the grip section. We have 3 claws, which hook in there and line up with screw holes. Oh, I've got this in upside down. That's why there's a cover tech wheel in the middle. That's not right. All right, so I've got activation switch section, grip section, clips that hook in up top, line up with screws at the bottom, retention ring that goes up top, holds the clips in. All things told, by the way, I would have expected this setup to rattle, but if you have everything tight, it really doesn't, so I'm kind of happy with that. And then a pommel. All right, let's move on to features. All right, so now that it's reassembled, let me go ahead and talk about the function of the board. So this is something that's in general going to be the case with TXQ Sabers, not necessarily just this model. I'm going to be talking about this model though, so the character sabers are a little bit different insofar as they've got funky buttons that don't have the light up ring, so a lot of the instructions that you get with the TXQ Sabers don't actually apply to these, so you got to kind of wing it. So I'll talk a little bit about that. First off, let me talk about deep sleep. To put this thing into deep sleep, you hold down the button for a prolonged period of time until it yells at you, and that tells you it's going into deep sleep. Its mode for deep sleep is a Kylo Ren voice telling you that the resistance is over. That can be a little bit bracing if you've just turned the saber off and you leave it sitting around for a while and then 3 minutes later it yells at you. But it does tell you that it's in deep sleep, and if you're putting it there intentionally, then you know what you're doing. Let me go ahead and do that just so you can hear it. As you can see, it takes quite a while.
The resistance is dead! The war is over!
Alright, so there's Kylo telling me that the saber is in deep sleep. So at this point, the buttons aren't going to do anything at all. Okay, to wake it up from deep sleep, I hold down the button until it makes a noise. Now the instructions that come with this thing tell you that you hold it down until the button flashes a certain number of times. With the character sabers, as I mentioned, the buttons don't flash sometimes. With this one, they're just solid silver. So you kind of have to wing it. A flash is about 2 seconds. So I think it says like 3 flashes, so that's about 6 seconds I gotta hold this down to wake it up. There we go. That tells me that it's awake. Now this has one motion sensitive setting. So unlike an LGT, which has several different turn on, turn off, adjust sound fonts, this one has one. The one motion sensitive setting is a hard swing or a stab, and that's actually going to turn it on. You can also get it with sometimes with a clash, but just do something violent to the saber and it turns it on. There we go. Alright, so now we've got activation. To turn it off, I hold down the button for 5 or 6 seconds, and it turns itself off. Alright, one thing that I would mention is that the setup that I'm using on this one right now is their baselit setup. They have a Profi NeoPixel that does all the stuff that you're used to a Profi doing. This right now, though, is their in-house TXQ board with its baselit. Just basically, if you get the less expensive version, this is what you get. Now, the Saber has 2 buttons, but this button down here does nothing in the baselit. This is for the higher end settings, like the Profi setting. This is actually just completely useless with the baselit. It's all on the one button. All right, so I can use the motion sensitive action to activate it, or I can tap the button and it comes on. Okay, once the Saber's on, hitting this button is going to activate a blaster deflect and associated flash. All right, if I hold down the button for 1 flash, which again equates to about 2 seconds, and then let it go, it looks like nothing happens, but when I activate the blaster deflect, I get a lockup instead. So that one's a little bit tricky to time. Hold it down for 2 seconds and then do the blaster deflect and you get a lockup. Tap it again to turn the blaster deflect off. All right, if I hold it down for 3 flashes, which again is like 5 or 6 seconds, then I get into the color cycle. All right, I believe that I'm in the color cycle. To find out, I tap the button. Here we go. And I can cycle through the different blade colors that it has as options just by hitting the button. When I get to one that I want, I hold the button down. Again, you have to hold it in for a certain number of flashes, but without the flashes, I find the easiest way to make certain that you get the right color is to hold it down or hold it in until the Saber actually powers off. Okay, It's just shy of that will lock it in, but if you miss it and then you try to hit the button, it's going to keep cycling through the colors, and you got to cycle all the way back around to the color that you wanted. So I find the easiest way is actually to turn it off. Now there's another automated color cycle where if I hold it in just shy of turning it off, it'll start cycling through colors. And theoretically, you can hit the button and lock in the color that you want when it goes by. I don't recommend that because it's difficult timing to get that color locked in before it cycles to the next color. You got to start immediately, hold it in for the right amount of time. And with the character sabers, that's really difficult to do. All right, so we've got color shift, we've got motion on, we've got blade lockup, and blaster deflect, all pretty much standard. Let me let you listen to the smooth swing here. Okay, it's a pretty simplified smooth swing. One thing that I don't particularly care for on this one is that the smooth swing seems to count any kind of motion, not just moving the saber around. If I actually rotate it, I get smooth swing. So it really just needs to be moved. It doesn't really care the direction or the speed of the movement. So once again, pretty simplified smooth swing, but again, for the base electronic model, I wasn't expecting too much more than that. The other features of this thing activate when the saber is off. If I hold the button in for 1 flash or 2 seconds, I can cycle between volume levels.
Mute.
Okay, here's mute. So no sound at all. My preferred setting most of the time. All right.
Low volume.
Low volume. And then back where it was before, which is high volume.
High volume.
So again, pretty basic setup. The other thing that we can do is we can cycle between sound fonts. I think this has 10 of them. In order to do that, it's 3 flashes, which is like 5 or 6 seconds. But here, let me show you. All right, so that was a new version of Luke, I believe.
Master
Qui-Gon. Darth Sidious. Vader.
Ben Solo.
Ben Solo. Ahsoka.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker. But you are not a Jedi yet. General Kenobi.
Kenobi, okay.
I've been waiting for this day for a long time.
And I think that was the last of them before we start over again.
Final steps.
Pretty sure that's where I started. So 10 sound fonts. It's a little bit tricky to cycle through them. You noticed that at one point there I started holding the button before the sound font had finished with its little sound font file, and it kind of confused the saber. So you got to be careful to let it finish saying what it's going to say before you try to cycle to the next. But you can cycle between the sound font settings, choose the one that you want. There we go. And there you have it. There's the sound font features for this board. So one last thing about the board. Let me go ahead and put it into deep sleep so it doesn't activate or accidentally activate.
The resistance is dead. The war is over.
All right, now I can pull it out. If I don't put it into deep sleep and I try to pull it, it's that clash or hard swing on, and the core actually turns on and starts making noise. But since there's no buttons, there's no way to actually turn it back off again without reinserting it into the saber. So let me go ahead and pull this. All right, so here's our soundboard, and on their base, you notice that there's no way to access a memory card in here. We've got a USB here, but that's just for charging. I can pull the battery, and you can see the board behind the battery, but I don't think that there is a memory card in this at all, so there's nothing customizable. It just is what it is. All right, so there you have it, the TXQ Revan. Final takeaway, is it the nicest Revan Saber on the market? Absolutely not. There's no way that it's going to be able to compete with things that are 3 or 4 times its price. Is it the most budget Revan on the market? No, it's not that either. It's somewhere in the middle. It's just a little bit higher up. But it is probably the cheapest Revan on the market that is going to get you away from that hole and recharge port for the Switch that you're going to see with like an LGT. So if you're looking for a little bit more accuracy, not complete accuracy, but a little bit more accuracy, this is a good next step up. You are sacrificing some features because the TXQ boards, unless you go with the Profi board, if you go with a Profi board, then you're right at the top of the industry level with anybody else who's using a Profi board. If you go with their base setup, then you're losing a few features because it doesn't have as much as the base setup of like an LGT. But you're losing a few features, but you're not losing many, and it's still highly functional. So hopefully this review has been of use to you guys. If it has, join me back next time, and we'll see you then.